don't ever let anybody stop you from believing that it's cool to be kind. That's the one thing I feel like that I struggled with so much, was that I like to be loving and kind. And people often will try to act like that's not cool, that's corny, that all this type of stuff. But I in my heart, it's like I've always wanted to share and be a loving person and all that kind of stuff. And that really stifled me sometimes as a young teen. And I would really just tell myself, don't stop believing that. Those are good things. Those are great qualities. Those aren't bad qualities. It might seem like that because of the type of people you're around, but don't let that stop you from being true. You know the truth.
And last but certainly not least is something that I do that is a little trick, all right? It's like first impression espionage. Because there's no getting around liking somebody when they actually give you a compliment. When I meet somebody for the first time, I try to look for something that I can compliment them on, all right? Because automatically, you compliment them, they like you more. It happens, right? Because when somebody gives you a compliment, you're like, yeah, you just like them more. It works, gentlemen. And then when they think of you next time, they're gonna think of that dude who gave them the compliment that they automatically like. Gentlemen, here's the deal. First impressions. We only have one chance to make it, so make yours count.
I have to show up at work with the right attitude and with the positive energy. And I actually had a t-shirt made that said positive energy is a part of your job description, right? So the idea that I want to show up with the right energy, I want to show up, you know, we're all here. You know, even now we're all here, we're trying to feed our families, we're trying to have a good time, we're trying, you know, this is an important part of our lives. Our time is all that we have. So to me, it's hugely important to deliver positive energy in a way because it's viral. So if I come with positive energy, then someone else is going to pick up on the positive energy and you're going to take it home to your families. And, you know, so for me, it's just hugely important to approach everything and everybody at every turn with the most positive, loving kindness that I can generate.
So I think the biggest myth about vulnerability is that it's weakness. I think a lot of people were raised to believe that. It was modeled, I think, certainly in our culture. We see that a lot, that to be vulnerable, to be open, to be exposed is to be weak. And the truth is, you know, what I found in my research is that vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, I would argue that it's our greatest measure of courage. When we went out and asked people, what is vulnerability? We heard things like, vulnerability is the first date after my divorce. Vulnerability is starting my own company. Vulnerability is taking responsibility for something that went wrong at work. Vulnerability is sitting with my wife who has stage 3 breast cancer and making plans for our young kids. Vulnerability is taking my business public. You know, the definition I use in my work of vulnerability is simply uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is about the willingness to show up and to be seen even when there are no guarantees. And it's interesting to me, I mean, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I gave a talk, it's probably a couple of years now, and it was being translated by people doing American Sign Language, and they came up before the talk started and they said, are there any words that you're going to use a lot in your talk that we should know about that or might be different? And I said, well, I use the word vulnerability a lot. And they kind of, there were two of them, and they kind of looked at each other and they said, oh, we do this for vulnerability. And I said, what does that mean? They said, it means weak in the knees. And I'm like, wow, that's not how I talk about vulnerability. And she said, well, there's only one other sign for vulnerability. And I said, what is it? And she said, and I said, oh, that's what I'm talking about. And so to me, vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. I mean, it's pretty powerful when I have 13,000 pieces of data collected over 12 years that I cannot find a single incident or story of courage that was not completely underpinned by vulnerability. I think the problem arises that there's so many little paradoxes with vulnerability, and one of them is that vulnerability is courage in you, but weakness in me. When I meet you, it's the first thing I look for in you, but it's the last thing I want to show you in me. And so I think to really put ourselves out there, knowing that if we do that enough, we're going to fail, I just don't think it gets more courageous than that.
Some people are aware of that, but probably most people aren't. And you hear all these rebuttals like, aren't there all these problems on Earth that we need to deal with, and shouldn't we focus on that? And the answer is yes. I mean, our primary focus should be problems on Earth, but I think that there should be some small amount that's given over to the establishment of a colony on Mars and making life multiplanetary. By small amount, I mean some number less than 1% of our resources. So, you know, it's not as important as say healthcare, but it's more important than, like, say, cosmetics. I mean, I'm in favor of cosmetics. I like them; they're great. But you know, lipstick or colony on Mars, I don't.
Question that has been discussed over the past couple of days. Should we be considering one-way only trips to Mars? What's the best approach to colonize the planet? Is it, what's your view? Is that socially acceptable? Do you think people will sign up to do it?
I think there's plenty of people who sign up for a one-way trip to Mars. But
maybe if we could have a show of hands, who would consider such an option? I see some, not many, but perhaps enough for a couple of missions.
So certainly be enough. I mean, I think it's sort of like, is it a one-way mission and then you die? Or is it a one-way mission and you get resupplied? That's a big difference.
Wait for the second option.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think it ends up being a moot point because you want to bring the spaceship back. Like, these spaceships are expensive, okay? They're hard to build. You can't just leave them there. So whether or not people want to come back or not is kind of, like, they can jump on if they want, but they need the spaceship back.
Thank you.
I mean, it's kind of weird. Like, there's like huge collection of spaceships on Mars over time. It was like, maybe we should send them back. I mean, of course we should send them back. Speaking of crazy things, went to Russia 3 times to negotiate a deal to buy a couple of the largest ICBMs in the Russian fleet. A strange experience.
How do you even get into that negotiation?
Well, you talk to people who know people, and pretty soon you're talking to the Russian rocket forces, and you know, they. It turns out Russia's quite a capitalist society, so but it definitely has had some weird meetings in places that I swear they looked like a sanitarium or something. I don't know. It was very odd.
We keep going back to the theme of crazy.
Yeah. Seriously, this place had padded walls. You're like, why do you have padded walls? It was weird. Yeah, and then there was some sort of Russian guy who was missing a front tooth started yelling at me. Because one of his front teeth was missing, it was like spit flying at me. In a place with padded walls. I'm like, this is really bizarre.
What's happened to my life?
Right.
And that was the moment when you thought, I'm going to build my own rocket.
Yeah.